Hello, friends. For the month of January, I'm joining with a group of amazing TTRPG creators to raise money for Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières. I am so proud to be a part of this generous community and to support a cause I deeply care about, bringing greatly needed emergency relief to the people of Gaza. Help us meet our goal of $3,000, and while you're at it, help my team, the Watermelon Seeds, win by leaving a comment along with your donation. Your generosity proves that our community cares. To leave a donation, go to the show notes on my episode or go to characterswithoutstories.com and you'll see it pop up. Thank you so much in advance for your generosity.
So it wasn't like a full-blown classic wizard like Gandalf, but more of like the children's party magician.
You know, in the beginning of Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is essentially a children's party magician.
Being exposed to lots of different people and lots of different ideas, I think, is very helpful in growing that empathy. And so that's something that I do really value. And I think that most of my characters have that in them. It's hard to shake that value. And drew their own poster and stuck it up in the room.
It's adorable. It's like a boy band poster. Hello, friends. Welcome to Characters Without Stories, a TTRPG podcast about the roads not yet traveled. I'm Star. This episode, I'm joined by Alex, also known as Apples and Cinnamon. Alex is a TTRPG enthusiast and a blooming forever GM. They make TTRPG content somewhat sporadically, but play in a variety of games in as many systems as possible. Alex, I'll give you a chance to share anything you want to share with my listeners at the end. But right now, do you want to tell my listeners a little bit about yourself?
I'm Alex, they, she. I mostly play Dungeons & Dragons 5e, but I do also love to try out other systems. And I occasionally on TikTok will make TikToks about various systems that I love for people to try out and experiment with.
Alex, who are you bringing to the table today?
I am bringing Nyx or Nixie. They are a magician from the system Quest, which is a very, very fun TTRPG system that's a little bit different than D&D, which is what most people are familiar with.
How is it different?
So for one thing, there are not like races in the same way that there are in D&D. You just describe your character. They can look however you want, and it is up to you to take those creative liberties. And it's more about your backstory and your culture than it is about any established lore in Quest. And also, you only need one singular die to play Quest. Just one d20, and that is literally all you need. Their starter pack only comes with a single d20.
So how would you describe Nyx?
Nyx is just shy of 6 feet tall. They have a speckled complexion, a radiant smile, and a friendly demeanor. They wear a fancy hat and a fluttering cape, and they move with a spring in their step. So one thing that's very fun about Quest is that is literally from my character sheet. Because when you're creating a character, that's the first step that you do is you have a list of different traits, and you select which ones of those you think would apply to your character. And you have just a fill in the blank, kind of like a Mad Libs type thing to create your character.
I love Mad Libs. That's great. I don't know if you're familiar with Powered by the Apocalypse games, but the pick list is a style I'm very familiar with from those kind of games. Is it the same sort of thing?
Yeah, it is similar to that as well. Though they always say at the bottom of them is like, if you have something better, go ahead and fill it in. It is similar to that in a lot of ways, except for with Powered by the Apocalypse, I feel as though like the 2d6 system is similar to Quest in some ways, but it's also a little bit different because Quest just focuses on everybody basically having the same chance of succeeding on something. You don't have any bonuses that you add to anything, but it's kind of a unique system in that way. It's a system that I really enjoy because of that.
That's really interesting to me. You don't have stats in the game? Like you don't have any sort of modifiers to your dice rolls?
Not at all. You have different abilities that you can use, and some of them don't require you to spend any sort of resource besides saying, like, nope, I just do this. And if you try to do something using one of those abilities or just like one of the standard abilities, like anyone can attack, you just roll a d20 and you either succeed or you fail. Now, a nat 20 and a nat 1 still have consequences. Nat 20 is called a triumph, where you do something beyond what you normally are capable of doing, and a nat 1 is called a catastrophe. But if you get a 11 through 19, you succeed, you do it as normal. 6 through 10, you get a tough choice. 2 through 5, you get a failure. But catastrophes are always interesting.
I love a nat one in when playing D&D. I embrace failure because failure is sometimes the most fun.
Yeah. There's a lot of growth that can happen in failure.
Is there any sort of character progression in the game? Do you level up?
Yeah. So one thing that you can spend as a resource is called adventure points. Every game, when you create a new character, you start out with 10. And there are certain abilities, more powerful abilities, that you can spend adventure points on. For instance, Nyx is a magician. There's different abilities that they have that cost different adventure points. So if they had certain spell that they wanted to cast, it might say, all right, in order to cast the spell, you need to spend 2 adventure points. But your guide, which is what they called the GM in Quest, is the one who can give out adventure points. So, like, if you do a really good job in a role-playing scene, they might say, like, okay, go ahead and take an adventure point for that. Or if you solve a difficult puzzle, or if you beat a boss, you can get adventure points that way. And at the end of every session, every player, as a reward for coming together and playing a game, gets 5 adventure points and also gets a new ability. So each of these different playbooks have different abilities that you can gain. You start off with 6 and then you gain more as you go on. There's some really cool ones out there.
What does being a magician in Quest mean? Is that similar to a class?
Yes. So your playbook, there's a couple of different ones. Magician is just the one that I find the most fun because they're all about illusions and mesmerizing people, delighting an audience, or distracting an enemy. There's lots of different things you can do as a magician. And I thought it was very fun because when I initially thought up of Nyx as a character, I was thinking, okay, this is going to be for a D&D game because that's what I usually end up playing. And I was like, oh, I couldn't really find something that was exactly what I was looking for. And I was like, okay, an arcane trickster is kind of what I want. And then I started looking more into Quest and I was like, magician is exactly what I want. It's someone who is putting on a show, but has kind of a wizard flair. It's all about distracting people from reality, either in a fun way, like as a magician performing a show and entertaining children, entertaining the masses, or it's distracting people so that the fighter in the group can get a better hit in if it's like a big bad guy.
Was it that this particular playbook appealed to you because of a character concept you had in mind? Or did it come about more that you saw the playbook and thought, oh, I can build a character around this?
More that I had a character in mind who was just kind of percolating in the back of my head. Is that's often the case when when you GM a lot. You're like, oh, I have a character idea, but I'm running this game, so maybe they'll pop up as an NPC or something. But kind of percolating in the back of my mind, and I was just finding like I need the right idea, the right DM who will work with me to create the character that I was looking at. And then as I was looking through, because I was going to run a game of Quest for some friends, because we were looking at different systems, and I was reading the Magician playbook, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly Nixie. Like, this is what I wanted for them. And then I use that as like, I did build out their character sheet just because I was using it as an example as I was helping others build their character sheet. I was like, okay, so this is what I would do for this character. But I built it out and I was just like, maybe someday someone will run a game of Quest for me so I can I can try out Nixie. Yeah.
Your situation is essentially why this podcast exists.
Yes.
Not everybody I talk to is a GM, but it's pretty common.
Yeah. I feel like it's such a common thing because, I love running games. It's one of my favorite things to do. But, sometimes it's fun to play, to be the player and get to make the character.
So you started with a character concept in this case. Is that something you usually do, starting with a concept and then finding the mechanics that fit?
Usually, yes. That's normally how it goes. Is I will think of oftentimes what sparks it is actually listening to music. It's like I will hear a song. I'm like, oh, there could be a story behind this song. And then I come up with a story behind it. And then I go and look for what mechanics would fit for this character. Sometimes, if it's for a one shot or something like that, I will just be like, this class seems interesting. Let's see what I can do with that playbook or whatever. But a lot of times I actually start with the idea of the character and then I look to see which one is going to fit the best.
What was the kernel of this character concept that got you excited?
This one is a little bit silly. Is I was on Etsy and I was looking at Ren Fair costume ideas and I came across the shop that sold wizard hats. And there was one that was way out of my price range, but was very, very cute. It was like the classic wizard hat with the stars on it and everything. And it had all these dangling bits of stars. And I was like, that is so gorgeous. And then I was like, what if there was a character who would wear that and be like a goofy wizard, but did like just like magic tricks for kids and stuff like that? So it wasn't like a full blown classic wizard like Gandalf, but more of like the children's party magician dressed as a wizard. So,
Well, I mean, in the beginning of Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is essentially a children's party magician. It's just not just for children, though. I mean, he brought fireworks to a party.
we all love Gandalf's fireworks.
Yeah.
We know that he's hiding something more there.
Yeah. The idea of a children's party magician going into an adventure where, they might have to use those skills to actually fight enemies is really funny to me.
I'm a bit on a streak right now of tragic characters, but for a while, I very rarely made tragic characters backstories. Those are fun, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I just like character who had a happy backstory and now they're going to go and they're going to face their adversity and all of that.
Speaking of backgrounds, what is Nixie's background?
They're originally from a roadside inn where everyone is known for their hospitality. That was the little kernel that I got from Quest. And then I expanded on that, yeah, they used to live in an inn called the Lonely Rose. And their parents ran the inn. And while they were cleaning the rooms and cooking the food, Nixie started learning magic tricks and started performing for the people who were staying at the inn. And that's where they kind of started learning how to do these different magic tricks and how to capture people's attention and things like that. And eventually they decided, it's time to take this show on the road. One night, as they were walking in between towns, there was a group of bandits that attacked. There was a group of heroes that stepped in, and Nixie used a little bit of their magic to help. And they were like, there is a way that this little stage trick of mine could actually help people besides just entertaining them.
What got Nixie into learning magic in the first place?
Not completely written out yet, but I had the idea that maybe one day when they were young, there was a traveling circus that came through and happened to stay at their parents' inn. And the one that caught their attention was a magician who was doing these gigantic feats of magic. And Nixie just had to know, oh, what is this? How can I do this? A lot of times when you're a kid, it just takes that one moment of reading something or watching something, just sparks your imagination.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like my son is 5 right now. So I don't think that there's anything he's going to be into right now that's going to end up being a career. But he has a new obsession every week based on some video he saw or something. Right now, it's magic tricks. So I can relate. Was it hard for Nix to set out on the road?
Yeah, I do think it was hard for them because, when you're from a small town and you only know one thing, it can be very difficult to leave that and go in and experience the world, even though that's probably something that's going to be very good for you because experiencing other ways of life and experiencing other things that are out there is very important. It helps you grow as a person. So, although it was very hard for them, I think in the end it was probably very beneficial.
It sounds like living in a roadside inn, you'd probably get exposed to a lot of different types of people. Everybody who's traveling on the road could potentially be a new friend.
Yeah.
Were there a lot of adventurers that came to stay at the inn? Is that kind of the vibe of the game?
Yeah. I think that that's kind of like the idea is that they saw a lot of adventurers coming in. And that honestly may have put them off adventuring for a little bit because they're like, oh, these people are coming in, they're very beat up and they need a place to rest. Well, that's not going to be me. I'm going to be the traveling magician. And then circumstances change, life changes.
So, what made them make the jump from being a traveling entertainer to being a traveling adventurer?
I think that there was a time when there was a group of bandits that attacked and they came in and they ended up using their magic to help. And when they did that, they saw, oh, I can actually use this ability that I have to help people in a little bit more of a tangible way rather than just using this ability to just entertain people. Not that entertaining people doesn't help them, but it helps protect people and that kind of thing.
So Nyx is motivated to help people, like started out being motivated to help people even before going out on their adventuring career.
I think, yes, when you live in a place where you're at an inn, if it's a nice inn, people are going to be hospitable to you. People want to help make you feel comfortable while you're traveling and you're away from home. And I think that their parents probably imparted those lessons on them, and that has stuck with them.
It sounds like Nyx is, all in all, a good person, but do they have any flaws?
Oh, yes. They overestimate their abilities a lot. They're like, yes, I have the perfect thing for this. And it's just something that is of no use. Or they think, like, yeah, I'll just go and talk to them. They'll be fine. People are fine. I'm very good at talking to people. And meanwhile, they're not as good at talking to people as they think they are. So they probably need to be a little bit humbled.
What kind of abilities does Nixie have?
There's a couple of different things that they have. The way that Quest works is that there are different, what we would think of as like subclasses, different paths you can take depending on your playbook. But the interesting thing about that is you can take them from any of the playbooks. So you could have a mix of different abilities from each one. So the ones that they have the ability to perform small magic tricks. They can make brief sound effects, little smells. They can give people like a little physical sensation, like someone's tapping on their shoulder or like cool breeze on their face. But they can also mesmerize people. So they can use an optical illusion to just entrance someone so that they only pay attention to that and don't pay attention to anything else around them. They also have the ability to, for a very short time, look beyond physical reality. So they can see magic and they can see through illusions. But some of these they can only do a couple of times before they run out of their magic.
I already can imagine so many ways in which those kind of distract, those illusion abilities could be really fun in a
Oh, yeah.
combat situation.
Definitely. Just like make an illusion of a dancing clown in front of someone and distract them for a little while. Like, no, don't worry about anything else that's going on over here. Pay attention to what's in front of you.
Amazing. You said that there's kind of a playbook, sub playbook situation in Quest. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
The way that it works is that you choose your playbook and you start off with a couple of different starting abilities. They do give you like advice on which ones you should choose, but you can choose whichever ones you want. Each one of the different paths, as they call them, have a different theme behind them, and you can take different abilities in order. They have them listed in an order, and you can take them in that order, but you can take them from any different playbook. So for the magician, the different ones that you have are misdirection, mannequins, clairvoyance, conjuration, and mind control. I think that Nixie has a very big concentration on misdirection. That's what they like to do. But if I wanted to, I could take an ability from the mind control path just to, oh, this one seems really interesting. I'm going to take this one as well. But mind control does not really necessarily seem like their vibe. You start off with a certain number when you first create your character. And then at the end of each session, you get to choose a new one. And so you choose whichever path you want to go on and then choose the next ability. Magic Tricks is the first one in misdirection. And then Mesmerize comes after that. So if I had those two as my abilities, then when we leveled up, I'd probably take the next one, which is called Over There. Because it's all about misdirection.
That's a very funny name for an ability.
A lot of them are very funny. I think that the writers of Quest had a lot of fun making a lot of these different abilities.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a game that doesn't take itself too seriously.
Yes, the best way possible.
So you're allowed to take abilities from within the magician playbook, but then you also have the choice of any of the paths. Can you take abilities from other playbooks?
Typically, no. However, it does give you rules as the guide of what you can do if someone wants to try and take that from another playbook. But typically, there's not a lot of multi-classing as we think of it in Quest. You just stick with whichever playbook you want to. And there's kind of an incentive to do that as well, because if you end up being able to take all your playbook abilities as you continue to play, then you're able to take from the legendary moves that you can do, which are very, very powerful and can really shake up a game. But you have to have collected all the other abilities. If you're like, oh, well, I really want to take something from the wizard playbook, your GM can be like, are you sure? Because then everybody else is going to have access to their legendary abilities before you will have access to them, which does incentivize you to just keep on taking the abilities from your own playbook.
I think that's an interesting question that often comes up is inter-party balance. I know some players will really be motivated by getting to that legendary ability. Others might not. So you mentioned that you might want to steer players to all getting to that level. Is that so they all feel equal in terms of power levels, or is there another reason for that?
I think that that's really the primary reason. So they all feel like they have the ability to really influence the world at the same time, because there are playbooks in this game where like literally you can change the shape of the entire world with your abilities. There is one of the playbooks is called the Naturalist, and one of their legendary abilities is called World Wish. And you can just change the world to whatever environment you want it to be with growth and the climate and everything. And that is a very, very powerful ability.
Yeah, I mean, you have a character who could essentially end climate change by themselves.
Yeah. It'll take them a little while because I got to collect all the other abilities, but
That's something that it would be good to work towards. Unfortunately, we don't have that ability
yeah,
in real life.
unfortunately, the naturalists don't exist.
You mentioned wizard, and it sounds like naturalist. These are other classes that can cast magic. Are those the only other two, or are there other ones as well?
There are some other ones as well, and it depends on what you mean by magic, too. So, there is a class called the Doctor, which some of the abilities are flavored a little bit as magical in the text of the book itself. However, I had a player who was a doctor and he very much themed his character around the plague doctors, and all of the abilities were flavored as like, oh no, I'm not doing a magical heal on you. I am sticking you with a syringe. And and that's how that is happening. But the doctor can cast some magic. And then there is the invoker. The closest thing, if we're thinking like D&D classes, would probably be a paladin because they can infuse their strikes with magic, but they are primarily a what we call like a martial class or martial playbook.
So, in the world of Quest, would you say that there are different forms of magic, or there are people who manipulate the magic in different ways?
That's one of the things I actually really like about Quest in a way is that there's not super set world lore. You can really adapt it to whatever you'd like. So if you want to have a low magic world, but you still want there to be healing and stuff, well, maybe the magician only does sleight of hand. The doctor really does just have syringes full of medicine, and that's how they're healing people rather than it actually being magic. Now, wizard might be a little bit harder to fit in if you wanted to do that with Quest, but it's one of those things where you as a player and also as the guide are given a lot of freedom in how you want to flavor things. They give you the abilities, but if you want to move them around to be whatever you'd like, you definitely can. So there's a lot of really cool things like that.
What kind of world do you think Nixie would fit into?
I would say probably one with magic. I think that the nice thing about Nyx is that they could be in kind of like a more modern or like steampunky world, or they could be in more of the classic fantasy world. Because I feel like even in like a more modern or steampunk or whatever you want to call it, there could still be a weirdo dressed up like an old wizard Halloween costume casting spells, even if most people are not doing that. It's fun to be the weirdo in the crowd sometimes.
I agree. Speaking of being the weirdo, does Nixie have any particular quirks?
Oh, absolutely. They are a little bit foolish, like they laugh at very bad jokes, bad puns, that type of thing. And also just like, we'll dive headfirst into situations that they don't really fully understand. I like to imagine that they are always shuffling cards. Because, what's a magician without a deck of cards?
That's a lot of fun. I like that one. Going back to your description of the character, the things that you chose, can you tell me about those choices that you made?
So, when people see me, they first notice my speckled complexion, radiant smile, and friendly demeanor. I wear a fancy hat, a fluttering cape, and move with a spring in my step. Speckled complexion, I have a bad habit of giving all my characters freckles. I just, I had a lot of freckles when I was younger, and I just think they're cute. So it just happens. And a radiant smile, they're normally in a good mood. So having a big silly grin on their face, I think really captures a lot of their personality. And friendly demeanor, like they grew up in a little roadside inn. They know how to be hospitable, so they're going to be friendly to people. Sometimes they shouldn't be friendly to everybody, but That's just one of their little quirks. The fancy hat is what inspired the character, so I had to have a fancy hat. The fluttering cape, I just thought that would be a fun thing to have that kind of leans into that like classic wizard look, even though they're not a wizard, they're a magician. And then a spring in my step. The way that you move does say a lot about you. And so they're not trudging along, they're hop skipping along as they're going on their little adventures.
How old is Nixie?
Nixie is only in their 20s. I wrote 22 on the character sheet, but I think I might make them a little bit older, so maybe like 25 or so. But they have a lot of that youthful innocence and optimism about them.
What gender are they?
They're non-binary. They use they them pronouns because, you can't pin down a gender on magic.
Interesting. Tell me more about that.
Well, I just spent a lot of gender thoughts in my life recently. So, kind of thinking about them when I was initially creating them, and I kind of sat down, I was like, well, what gender would they be? And I was like, they're neither, because neither of the conventional choices, rather, because for them, magic is all over the place and it can't be kept in a box, much like they can't be put into a box. It's for everybody. It's going to explode and expand and just be whatever it is, despite what people might perceive it as.
Is Nyx's magic innate, as in they were born having abilities, or is it something that can be studied and learned?
I think that it's something that needs to actually be studied and learned and pulled out of the universe. Like it's something that's in the air for them, but it's not something that comes from within them. So they can pull it out and they can perform it and they can use it however they'd like, but it's not something that comes from within it. Rather, they pull it into themselves.
How old were they when they started doing that?
Fairly young, like maybe 12, 13, around there.
The way you describe how magic interacts with their gender expression or their gender identity, I find it interesting because you're talking about a character who didn't start out from a young age knowing magic or understanding magic. And so that realization about the nature of magic came later. Was that the same for their realization of their gender identity?
Yeah, I think maybe so. I think that there's more of me in this character than I am realizing, than I originally realized. But yeah.
That's pretty common. I feel especially, and maybe it's just for my guest or the type of people that I know, but I feel like exploring gender identity in TTRPGs is often accompanied by an exploration of gender identity outside of the game.
Yep. I met a lot of non-binary people through playing TTRPGs. And I had some like online friends like through Tumblr and things like that. But I do think that there's a different expression you have when you're playing a character because a lot of times you put a lot of yourself into that. And like as I got to know people, I was like, the way that they're describing things is a way that I have thought about a lot of things for a while. And like, hey, once again, meeting lots of new people really expands your worldview. And so I tried out a couple of characters, like if we were like doing a one shot or something, I'm like, you know what? I'll try out some different pronouns for this character and went from there.
Yeah. In terms of other aspects of Nixie's personality, like you're mentioning the openness to all types of people and that this kind of friendliness and hospitality, are those things that you yourself value?
I definitely do. I grew up all over the place in the United States because my family was military. So we moved around a lot and we settled in Texas, and I've just kind of stuck in Texas from then. Texas does have a reputation of being small minded about certain things. And I do definitely agree that there are places in Texas that are very much like that. But when I went to college, I went to University of Texas at San Antonio. San Antonio is a very diverse city. There's a lot of different types of people there, and especially at the university. And so being exposed to all sorts of different people and moving around and living on military bases. There's all sorts of people. My best friend when I was like 8 or 9 was had a British accent because he had lived in the UK for most of his life before moving to that military base in the United States. It was just being exposed to lots of different people and lots of different ideas, I think is very helpful in growing that empathy. And so that's something that I do really value. And I think that most of my characters have that in them. It's hard to shake that value.
Yeah, definitely. I find personally that I'm very much in my personal life a bleeding heart. Like, I care about people. I want to do the right thing. It's very important to me. So I have never played a character that didn't feel the same way. There's some values that we hold that are very hard to not bring into our gaming and our characters. But there are definitely some people who want to play characters who have different values. Do you find that you tend to stick with kind of your personal morals and values most of the time?
Most of the time.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's hard, and I always feel like I am playing currently in a Rime of the Frost Maiden game. And when I originally made my character for that game, I was like, they're going to be mean. They're going to be nasty. They don't care about anyone. They believe that life is up here in the north is how it is. And like, if you're going to die, go ahead and die. And then like, I'm using my abilities to run across the field and heal someone because I'm like, no, that's my friend. They did not stick mean very long. I think that even when I try to do mean characters, I just put too much of my own soul into my characters. It's hard to shake that.
Yeah, definitely. Does Nixie have a vow or motto that they live by?
Not really a motto, but I think that their goal in life is to bring as much wonder into the world as they can.
I love that. That's a wonderful thing to live by. And you think that primarily when they talk about wonder, when they think about wonder, they're thinking about magic?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned your friend who has a British accent. Are accents something you do when you play characters? And if so, does Nyx have a accent?
So I don't think Nyx has an accent, more of just an affectation, but I do accents. Most of them are pretty bad. But yeah, you can just ask my players who are in a Curse of Strahd game that I am running. They're like, oh yes, that is just the Barovian accent. That does not exist in the real world. Like, yes. Uh, but I do try to do accents occasionally. I'm not particularly good at them, but you know what? It's a fantasy world. Maybe that's what that accent sounds like.
Yeah, it's a totally different world. And people, maybe they have accents that change every time you see them.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm doing a tour of the British Isles on purpose, not because I can't maintain an accent.
So tell me more about Nixie's voice, about the affectation that you're planning to use.
So I think that their voice is going to be like a little bit higher. They're going to be a little bit excited, a little bit breathy, and all their words are really, really fast. And they're so excited to be here at any time. And oh my gosh, look over at that. That's so cool. Just kind of putting a lot of their personality into the voice, I feel like is normally what I try to do with characters when I'm not doing an accent. And sometimes when I am doing an accent, though, that doesn't always go very well. Uh,
Going back into kind of the general characteristics, have you decided on any sort of sexuality for Nixie? Or is that something that you even decide before you start playing?
Normally, I just kind of default to lesbian because that's what I am. But normally I just kind of let my characters do whatever they feel like. Very rarely is it a conscious choice. I did have a character that I very purposely made ace and arrow, mostly because at that point I was kind of sick of romances in games. Not in a bad way. I was just like, I don't want this character to have a focus of romance, which worked out well because we had a character in that game who was very, very focused on romance. So I was like, good, they can have the spotlight. For Nyx, though, I don't think I really have made a decision for them. Because I don't think that romance is something that they're really actively pursuing in life. But I don't think that they would say no to it either. I don't think that they're Arrow. Maybe Ace. I'd have to think a little bit more on that.
It's often something personally that I discover in character. I don't decide ahead of time unless I have built some sort of relationship into their backstory. It sounds like you don't have anything like that already planned out. But are there other significant relationships to Nixie?
I do think that they have a good relationship with their parents, their moms, who own the inn. And then I don't think that they know that much about that magician who came in, but I do think that they idolized the hell out of them. And drew their own poster and stuck it up in the room. That's what I think they look like, if I remember correctly.
It's adorable. It's like a boy band poster.
Just hand drawn.
It was a lot harder to be a fan back then, okay?
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot more work.
Kids these days don't know the struggles.
Nyx, I know you grew up in an inn, but would you rather camp outdoors or spend the night in another inn?
Oh, as much as the outdoors is really, really exciting and kind of cool, I like a soft bed because, it just, when you rest your head, you can come up with new magic tricks. And sometimes you sleep on a rock and that's uncomfortable. So I think another inn is probably the way to go.
Do you have a something that you like to eat every time you stay at an inn?
Oh, I always look at the dessert menu. This is according to my mom. You always know if it's a good inn if they have good dessert. If they don't have good dessert, then it might be so-so.
I love to imagine all of the fantasy desserts that Nixie may have eaten.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alex, for joining me on the podcast and for sharing Nyx with us. I love them.
Thank you. I'm so excited to share them. Hopefully one day I will get to play them.
I wish the same for you as well. Hopefully one day I'll get to play Quest. It sounds like a really fun game.
Oh, yeah. It is a blast. I hope that maybe someday we can get together, group, and play it.
I'll post links in the description, but is there anything that you want to share with my listeners?
Well, if you're interested in hearing me occasionally talk about tabletop role-playing games and board games, and sometimes books, my TikTok is a mess. You can follow me at apples_n_cinnamon on TikTok.
I'm trying something new this episode. In the last few months, I've had the good fortune to meet several other podcasters in the TTRPG space. I have been struck by how supportive the community has been, and I want to pass it on by recommending some other podcasts that I think are well worth your time. This time, I'd like to introduce you to a podcast called All Our Faults. All Our Faults is a Monster Hearts actual play. What I love about the podcast is how the GM and players lean in to the messiness of being a teenager, bad decisions and all. I recommend starting with the prologue episodes as they provide important insights into the characters. I started a newsletter. If you'd like to get a behind-the-scenes peek at the podcast, follow my other projects, like my current all-woman actual play, and be notified when a new episode drops, you can find the sign-up form in the show notes or on my website. Please share the podcast with a friend. Word of mouth is the best way to find new listeners. Your recommendations help me immensely. Thank you to all my listeners spreading the word. I am so grateful. You can find me on TikTok at StarMamaC, that's StarMamaC, or on Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook as Characters Without Stories. You can also listen on YouTube at Characters Without Stories or follow the link in the description. I'm currently accepting submissions, particularly for non-white creators. If you'd like to share your character, you can go to the submission form at characterswithoutstories.com. Look for the Submit button in the navigation bar. Thanks for listening, and may all your characters find their stories.